don't mean to alarm you, but you're probably being manipulated by flowers, no less. Give it a moment's thought. Out in nature, flowers exist to spread their genes through nature by attracting pollinators to do all the hard reproductive work for them. In our collections, well, I don't know about you, but I can't resist a good flower, and so I want to buy more and more and grow more and more of them. And in the end, the result's the same. We see plants being propagated and we see them being spread all over the place, a continuation of their genes, not because of pollinators, but because of lunatics like you and me. So today we're going to be talking everything that there is to know about these manipulative little cactus and succulent flowers. Stick around. When you think about it, cactus and succulent flowers are a bit like the femme fatales of our collection. With a little bit of seduction and a little bit of manipulation, they're able to bring in those pollinators and get them to take pollen from one plant to another and secure the lineage of their species. But in the process, they kind of suck us in too, because I know I can't resist a good flower, just as I'm sure you can't either. How do they do it? Well, think about it. Some of them use these big, showy, colourful flowers, cacti in particular. Many of these plants present delicious nectar to their pollinators, and those that don't are often mimicking something else that'll bring in the bugs. There are a lot of plants also that are adapted to a more solitary life. They've figured out ways to overcome the difficulty of reproduction. And then there are some plants that are just super clever and have got all sorts of fascinating flowery tricks up their sleeve. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to unpack all the ways that these flowers manipulate pollinators and in turn manipulate us so that their species continues on into the future. The natural starting point is with cacti, because they've got some of the biggest, showiest, most colourful flowers around. A little bit like this beautiful little monkey tail cactus, Hilduintera collodimononis. Not the biggest cactus flower out there, but as far as colour goes, not bad at all. Now that monkey tails cactus flower is just a tiny little baby compared to many. For example, Solenocerius grandiflorus, an epiphytic cactus from the tropical regions of the Americas. That name grandiflorus, meaning big flower, can send out an absolute monster, as you can imagine. Even plants like more common Trichoserius are known for their big floral displays. Now, it's one of the reasons why so many people love to collect cacti, and it's actually brought in a whole cottage industry growing beautifully coloured hybrid cactus plants, because we are just intoxicated by the beauty of their flowers. Now the fascinating thing about cactus flowers is more often than not they're very short-lived. You might get a day or two out of them before they wither and fall apart. So they need to be very clever indeed at attracting their pollinators. With such a short time span, they can't waste time. So with that in mind, they're very cleverly evolved to make the most of their natural environment. You have many species like your Solenocerius that put out their flowers of a night time. Why? Because that's when their natural pollinators come out. They're pollinated by bats and moths. On the other hand, there are plenty that will send out their flowers in the daytime, attracting more traditional pollinators like your bees and your hummingbirds. One thing you'll notice about the difference of these two different types of plants is that the day flowering species almost always are the colourful ones, because insects are going to be attracted by that colour. Bats, they see at night time using echolocation. They don't see colour, and so those nighttime flowering plants, they're the ones that just have white flowers a lot of the time. It's a fascinating example of how these plants have cleverly evolved to manipulate the environment around them to ensure the continuation of their species. But as evidenced by that cottage industry of hybrid plant growers developing some of the most amazing flowers around, you should see this one called super apricot. In the Australian market, it sells for hundreds of dollars, but the flowers, I reckon, are worth it. They've manipulated us into continuing their genetic line in our greenhouses, in our gardens as well. Pretty clever stuff. Cacti certainly don't have a monopoly when it comes to offering delicious nectar to their pollinators. You'll find your euphorbias and many other succulent species do as well. But as you can see, on a plant like this Euphorbia francoisii, that's not bringing in the birds and the bees with a big floral display. What I find in my greenhouse anyway is that these little nectar glands on the flowers attract ants to do the pollinating. I don't know if that's how they work in nature, but it's interesting seeing how nature has adapted to them in this artificial space anyway. However, it's not the nectar presenting flowers that I actually find the most interesting. I'm going to share with you now some really cool and highly grotesque plants that like to mimic, well, let's just say, some not too pleasant substances. Amongst cactus and succulent collectors, there are few families of plants more divisive than the Asclepiads, that is, members of the subfamily Asclepioideae, plants like your Stapelias, your Huernias and the like. The reason being, these are your carrion plants of the succulent world, and they have, in often cases, really quite beautiful, delicately marked flowers. You can see this Huernia Pollanzii right now in flower. It doesn't have the delicate markings, but the flowers themselves are intricate and weirdly hairy, this deep maroon colour. Absolutely fascinating, and I love them. In fact, I absolutely love these flowers purely because of how weird and monstrous they can be. I reckon looking at my t-shirt you get a sense that I like the weird and the freaky. By the way, go and buy one, check it out. Anyway, on the topic of these things, the reason that these flowers are so divisive is because they absolutely stink in many instances. Mercifully, this one doesn't, but it's got a pretty cool look about it. What's it all about? Mimicry. What are they mimicking? Well, for the most part, they're either mimicking dead animals or shit. Why would you want to do that? Because their natural pollinators are flies, and flies love that kind of thing. Now, the stench is a big part of that manipulative strategy to bring their pollinators in. But what about the fascinating markings and colours of these flowers? A big part of the reason why people like to add these plants to their collection despite the hideous odour that they emit. Well, it's kind of like a combination of smell and sight, creating this fantastic manipulative display of death. Because the red here, and those plants like your Edithcolia grandis that have got a kind of mix of a fleshy white with red, the idea is to mimic a dead, rotting, maggot-filled corpse, a dead animal on the ground. All you need to do is take one sniff and you get a sense of what I'm talking about. Got a Larry Leachia in there. It was flowering a little bit earlier this year, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to give this a good smell, see if it's as bad as they say. I'll give you a hot review. Smelt like a mix of dirty rotten socks and a dead animal. Did not enjoy the experience whatsoever. But despite that, the flowers are what make these plants so fascinating. A lot of them, their bodies all look the same, but they become collectible because the flowers vary in size, shape, colour, and, well, unfortunately smell as well. But that's why people grow them, and that's why people love them. And I guess also why people hate them, but you know, that's not me. I reckon get them into your greenhouse and endure that stink for a few days or weeks, I suppose, if you're unlucky, but you know what? You get over it. The plants I've talked about so far today have all been plants longing for a partner, plants that use pollinators, I suppose, to help connect them reproductively with another member of their species. But a lot of these succulents grow in isolation. There isn't always a happy and willing partner around, and there is a whole group of plants, not related necessarily, that have overcome that reproductive obstacle. I'm talking about, of course, self-pollinating plants. They range from everything like this Dorstenia fetida to plants in the cactus family like your Lophophora williamsii, peyote, epithalanthus. They're everywhere, and they're plants that, when they need to, they can actually just pollinate themselves and ensure a continuation of their own genes. It's not an ideal reproductive approach, but it certainly gets the job done. I like to talk about Dorstenias all the time and how they're so good at self-pollination that they're practically a weed in the greenhouse. Well, this summer, I'll tell you what, they've taken over. They're popping up everywhere. This pot on itself has got 2 babies in it, but I've got probably, I reckon, 20 or 30 Dorstenia fetidas just popping up where they shouldn't be. Very effective promotion of their genes. But there's another fantastic trick that some plants, particularly cacti, have been known to do, and that is a kind of induced self-pollination. Rather than hybridizing with their neighbors, let's say you've got 2 different species growing in close proximity and a bee goes from this one to this one. Rather than hybridizing, the introduction of a foreign pollen from this plant into this plant actually induces self-pollination, even though this plant here may not typically be a plant capable of it. It's a fascinating adaptation to ensure, I suppose, gene purity. Even though in our collection sometimes we like to dabble with hybridization, plants don't tend to do that in nature as much as they possibly can anyway. Anyway, it just reveals the fascinating ways that plants have evolved out in the world to deal with isolation and loneliness. Why let not having a partner stop you from reproducing, hey? Imagine if that was in people. Oh, weird. Now, I talk about some of these plants being manipulative. Many of them are outright clever. Take, for example, Adenia kirkii, and maybe the other Adenias as well. I don't know, I just haven't observed it, but I have seen it in my Adenia kirkii. I've got a male plant and a female plant, and they'll send out buds at different times over the summer. But in a fascinating evolutionary adaptation, there is some environmental trigger that causes all of the flower buds on both plants to open at precisely the same time. Makes it very easy to pollinate them. Whereas, I find with cacti and many other plants, euphorbias, their flowers don't necessarily open at the same time, making pollination very difficult. Then of course you've got those plants that have got a very clever method of ensuring that their babies don't compete with them for nutrients, often in environments that are fairly nutrient deficient. I'm talking, of course, about plants that have an explosive capability. They shoot their seeds out of their flowers with quite high velocity. Pew! See you later. Go away, babies, is what they're saying. And that's a habit that we see both in our Dorstenias, like that Dorstenia fetida I shared with you earlier, and our euphorbias. You can see this is some kind of hybrid variegated Euphorbia obesa kind of thing. Gets sold as Euphorbia obesa variegata, but it's definitely not purebred. You only need to look at its columnar shape to get a sense of that. But anyway, you can see I've got a mesh baggie over it because it's got a seed pod that I'm waiting to explode so I can take those seeds and continue mucking around with hybridization. If I didn't have the bag, the seeds would be gone forever. They might pop up in another pot somewhere if I was very lucky. But anyway, what a smart way of ensuring that your children aren't competing with you for vital water and nutrition. The absolute queen of clever flowers goes to the genus Ceropegia. They're another Asclepiad, a vining, twisting, climbing Asclepiad. I do have one, Ceropegia ampliata. Unfortunately, it's not in flower right now, but they're sometimes known as the condom plant. And when you look at their flowers, it stands to reason why. What's so clever about these flowers is that they're actually designed to ensure maximum success in pollination. They have a bit of a slight whiff about them, and so flies are attracted to them. They climb into the flower, and then there's these kind of backwards pointing hairs located inside the flower shape. So what happens? The fly climbs in seeking that smell. It gets trapped in place by the hairs. It can't escape. It's like a little cage, trapped inside a cage. And what does it do? It struggles. It tries to get out with all of its might. And all that does is smother the fly in pollen. In a day or two, the flower withers, the fly escapes, but they're not the smartest creatures out there, and so they head straight to the next Ceropegia. Into the flower they go, and they deposit the pollen. What an absolutely brilliant and merciless way of manipulating a pollinator into doing your reproductive work for you. And of course, they're so weird and quirky that people want to buy them and add them to their collections, even though when they're not in flower, they just look kind of like a green twisty vine. When you put all that together, it becomes pretty clear to me that cactus and succulents, through their showy, strange, and often very clever flowers, well, they're not only manipulating their pollinators, they're manipulating collectors like you and me. And the end result is a continuation of the genetic lineage. Absolutely clever. They're taking advantage of us. But you know what? I'm totally okay with that. I hope today you've had a fun little journey through the world of cactus and succulent flowers. If you've got anything you want to say, questions you want to ask, comments, hate, whatever, chuck it into the comments. In the meantime, I might go do some pollinating if I can find some plants ready to go. Have a good one. I'll see you next time.